recording this information right on cue. We'll be recording this town hall, so you can come back as a source of information. And hopefully, we'll be able to share with able to join us here this evening. But we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a great panel for great couple of panels for this topic. First of all, I want to introduce myself and some of my colleagues. My name is David Garcia. I am a board member with Rockridge Community Planning Council, and myself and my colleague, Michelle Boyd, who is also a board member, are spearheading the town hall this evening. Also like to thank our board chair, Leonora C., who has been helping us out as well as Robin Mcdonnell. If you don't know RCPC, we are your local community organization dealing with all manners Rockridge. And so if you are interested in this topic or other topics, please reach out. We're happy to get more members involved here in the Rockridge community. But tonight, our topic is one that's very near and dear to my heart. If you saw my Zoom profile, you'll see that's me and my son dressed up as a single family home and as accessory dwelling unit. So this is something that I think is a great development, not just in California, but nationwide. And so we thought it would be a great topic of discussion for the Rockridge community, both understanding what ADUs are, what it is like to actually pursue and to build, and really to hear from the community with any questions that you have regarding ADUs. We have a great set of panelists for you. Michelle, if you can go to the next slide. We're going to hear from four folks, split up into two short conversations. First, we're going to hear from Cecilia Coyne and Darren Renoletti. Cecilia works for Maximal, which is an organization that does ADU education, and they do ADU building as well. Darren Renoletti is Policy Director for Housing Security, the Mayor's Office for the City of Oakland. We're happy to have them both here. I'll be having a conversation with them to start. And then after that, my colleague Michelle will be leading a conversation with two other panelists, Greg Pasquale, who is a Rockridge resident, as well as an ADU owner himself. And we'll also hear from Dan McDunn from McDunn ADUs, who is a builder of accessory dwelling units. So a couple housekeeping items. Again, we're being recorded, so we can hopefully make this a resource for community members moving forward. We're going to have a question and answer period after each of our panel discussions. And so we're going to ask that you, if you have any questions during the presentation, to drop them into the chat. Someone will moderate them and we'll be able to ask them directly to the panelists at the conclusion of our questions. So feel free to think about questions, drop them in the chat, or wait till the Q&A period and ask them then. Now, we're going to also ask that during the presentations that you keep your audio on mute, and so that we don't get any feedback or hear any of your conversations. So with that, I want to go ahead and jump into the content. But before we get to our first panel, I wanted to provide just a little bit of overview on how ADUs fit into the broader scheme of housing in California. So as some of you may know, a couple of years ago, the state actually passed some legislation that made it much easier for homeowners to pursue accessory dwelling in their backyard. This is a chart from the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley research, which, full disclosure, is also my employer. But this is research that shows that from the year 2018 to 2019, the total number of ADUs, both permitted and completed, has skyrocketed in the wake of state level legislation to make it easier to build these. So clearly there is a large interest across the state for homeowners to pursue accessory dwelling units. And if you can go to the next slide, you'll see a bit of for the state of California. It's a little hard to see, but you can see that basically everywhere in the Bay Area, you see that ADUs are being constructed or permitted and constructed really in many communities. So it's very exciting to see so many homeowners take advantage of this new state law to pursue their own new housing options. But this is still a relatively new concept for California. It's a really nascent industry. It's a nascent housing type. That's a lot of unknowns and frankly a lot of questions people have of what ADUs actually are, how a homeowner would actually go about pursuing an ADU development in their yard, and what it actually means to own and maintain one. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions and others that you may have on our panel today. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our first panel conversation with Cecilia Coyne from Maxable, who is going to give us kind of a nuts and bolts presentation about what ADUs are and what are the options that homeowners have to pursue their very own accessory dwelling unit. So we'll also have a conversation with Darren Renoletti from the mayor's office. But first, we're gonna hand it over to Cecilia to kick us off. And so thank you, Cecilia, for being with us here today.
And thank you so much, David, for having me. I am so excited. I was contacted a while ago about this this night, and couldn't wait for it to be here. So thank goodness we got over the technical issues. And so I have a presentation, and I'm going to share my screen. Oh, let's see. You know what? It's kind of weird. I'm seeing your screen, David. How does this work? For some reason, it's having me share your screen. Oh, I found it.
There it is. Thank you.
You got it. Great. Thank you. All right. So let me just get this. There we go. Okay. So as David mentioned, my name is Cecilia Coyne, and I am an ADU consultant with Maxwell Space. And we are California's leading ADU educator and designer. And I'm here tonight, you know, as a consultant, but also too, actually, even more importantly, is I'm actually, like many of you, that homeowner who was interested in building an ADU and had no idea what to do. So before I started with Maxwell, I actually was in the process, my husband and I were in the process of trying to figure out how to convert our detached garage into an ADU, and we had no idea where to go. And, you know, did a little Google search, saw a lot of content on the internet, found Maxable, and really from then we're able to start our journey. And so I have 4 tips for you guys tonight that hopefully will help you avoid expensive mistakes and just get started on building your own ADU. So like David, I have a family photo. This is my husband and my girls. I have 2 daughters in their 20s. And what made us start to look at converting our garage was, at the time, this was the summer of 2019, my girls were in transition and were having some housing issues, and were looking for, you know, new roommates, you know, kind of concerned, of course, about the cost of rent and all that. And my husband and I were like, man, maybe it's time to, you know, convert that garage into some kind of living space. Of course, at the time, we had no idea what the timeline would be. It was a lot more complicated than we ever knew, but that's sort of what got us started on, you know, our journey. And by the way, so as I mentioned, we're doing a garage conversion, but ADUs come in all different types. So again, garage conversion could be detached or attached. People can convert their attics, their basements. Above the garage is very, very popular. There's junior ADU, so there's lots of ways that you can build an ADU. So there we are, last September, that's what used to be my detached garage. And that's right after we got our building permit and we were ready to start construction. And as you can see, there's a garage today. I wish it were more sexy looking, but we had some delays, which you can always expect. But, you know, we got the stucco on, and as you can see here, we also decided to splurge on the cantina doors because we wanted to take advantage of the indoor-outdoor space. But we're actually going to start a drywall tomorrow. So hopefully one of these days I can have, you know, photos of it up. Well, actually, you will see photos of it completed on our website at some point. So as I mentioned, we've helped a lot of homeowners with ADUs all over California. These dots represent all the homeowners that have reached out to us for help on how to get started on building an ADU. And so we have gained a lot of knowledge through this process. And I certainly personally have gained a lot of knowledge that I, pass on to our homeowners. Oh, by the way, anytime you see the download icon, we can provide this PDF to you. So at the end of my presentation, I'm going to put in the chat a link for you to sign up if you want to get the information, because I know it's a lot and I'm kind of going through it pretty quickly. So tip number one is you got to understand some regulations. So some of the biggest regulations that occurred in January 2020 are that homeowner associations cannot prohibit ADUs. There's no minimum lot size. Setbacks have been reduced to 4-foot side and rear, and there's no owner occupancy required. And this is up until 2025. So that's why it says sunsets in 2025. After 2025, this law will be reevaluated, but we recommend, of course, if you're even thinking about it, to get started and get your ADU built, because even after 2025, you'll be grandfathered in. The other thing too is that there's huge opportunities for multifamily properties. So if you are an investor or someone who owns, a duplex or something like that, please contact us and we can let you kind of know the regulations regarding multifamily properties. Another big thing is that development and impact fees have been waived for units under 750 square feet. This is a deal breaker for ADUs, frankly. In development and impact fees can be in tens and 20s of thousands of dollars. So if you think it anywhere near that range, stay at 749 and you'll be gold. The other thing too is HCD, which is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, has more control and enforcement to make sure that the laws that were passed are being enforced at the local level. So I'm just gonna, this is a lot of stuff on this slide, but the main thing I want to focus on a couple of numbers. The first one is, many of you heard the term junior ADU. These are attached ADUs that are carved out of existing space in a home, and they're 500 square feet or less. The other thing too, I mentioned the 750 square feet as far as no impact fees, so we know about that. 800 square feet is the square footage that a city must allow regardless of any other development requirements. So, that's important to know that you can at least have 800 square feet for one bedroom. And then for 2 bedrooms or more, you can go up to 1,000 square feet. And then finally for maximums, the state will allow 1,200 square feet, for an ADU. Jurisdictions can allow more. I have not seen it, but that's something that you want to keep in mind. Tip number 2, it's very, very important. Start financing early. As you can imagine with COVID, interest rates are historically low, probably even lower than we've even seen, and everybody wants to refinance. And so we're seeing the time to refinance has been extended, I think at this point, maybe even up to 75 days, something like that, as opposed to like the 30-day or the 60-day. It's taken a long time to get financed. And also too, we're finding that, of course, with unfortunate byproduct of COVID is unemployment. So they're underwriters are looking more stringently at, income and where it's coming from, and just making sure that the funding is going to be there when it's time to finance your ADU. So how do people finance their ADUs? Well, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, cash out, renovation loans, and then finally, of course, good old cash. A lot of family people or family members are pooling their money. They're doing this together. Like my situation, we're not doing this together, frankly. My husband and I are paying for it, but let's say a couple and then their adult child that they might want to move in will pool the resources, or maybe it's a couple and their older or elderly parent who needs a space. They'll pool the resources together. Tip number 3, how to bring costs down. Well, some of the things that we talk with our homeowners about is value engineering. And that's basically what we're saying there is that you can have an awesome, incredible, beautiful ADU and it doesn't have to break your budget. So some ways that we talk with our homeowners about, and particularly through the design stage and then with our general contractors, is that looking at electric versus gas. So now with solar having been required on detached ADUs in particular, it might be a good idea to go all electric, you know, with your appliances, your tankless water heater, and then of course your mini split, which is your HVAC system, can be all electric, and ultimately you'll realize savings. Now, of course, many of you probably know that there's some jurisdictions where all electric is now required. I believe Palo Alto, San Jose, maybe even Berkeley. Berkeley might have been the first one actually, where all electric is required. So you really don't have a choice in that matter. But these are some ways to realize some savings. The other thing too is a lot of people ask, because ADUs often are rented out, is should you do split utilities? And if you really, really don't need to, we would say no, because it's very expensive to have split utilities. Instead, there are aftermarket sub-meters that you can get that are really great, that have apps, of course, that you can figure out, you know, how much the ADU is consuming and then how much your main home is consuming. And then another thing as far as design is that some people can realize savings by eliminating tile and instead use a one-piece shower surround, which this one actually looks fantastic. I don't know where that's from, but that's another way to realize some savings. The other thing too is having one plumbing wall. And that means you see here where the bath and kitchen are all on one wall, as opposed to the kitchen being over here, and then maybe on the opposite side of the ADU you have the bathroom. And my ADU is actually designed this way. All my kitchen and my bathroom are all on one wall, and then the trenching to connect to my main house is minimized. And of course, we recommend hiring the right designer. How a unit is designed dramatically affects construction costs. Things like type of roof, and we mentioned the plumbing wall. And we also recommend when you hire a designer, a designer or architect is fine. We do not recommend hiring a drafter, because typically drafters don't have the experience or the knowledge to be able to get your, not only design an ADU, but to get it through to the city for permitting. Tip number 4, understand the cost. This is a big one. I know that was my first question. How much does it cost? And if you go on the internet, don't go on the internet, because there's not a lot of accuracy there. I mean, I was like, please be like $50,000. No, they're not $50,000. So here's some things to know about costs. First of all, there's no bulk discounts like Costco with ADUs. What you need to know as far as costs is that cost per square foot are not great estimates for ADUs. And if you ever work with a general contractor, by far most of them, you know, will give you a quote based on cost per square foot. The reason why cost per square foot is not great for ADUs is because whether you have a 500 square foot junior ADU or a massive 1,200 square foot ADU, your first 400 square feet are going to be the most expensive, because you still need, in either case, a bathroom and a kitchen. Those are the most expensive parts of building an ADU. And so costs for ADUs, and I'll give you some, you know, starting numbers, but it can vary so much with things like, you know, how you design it, site access, you know, whether you have a slope, connecting utilities, and certainly the level of finish. I mean, whether you do more standard finishes with flooring and appliances and tiling, etc., or you do luxury, can affect the price of an ADU, of course. I was just talking to a coworker yesterday, and she's in Los Angeles, and she had 2 projects. Both were garage conversions, very similar, and one came in at $50,000 more than the other one, because it was completely dependent on what the choices that the homeowner made. And as you saw, we intentionally chose our bifold doors, and that's going to add to the cost. So here, some of the numbers that we've gotten updated actually recently from one of our general contractors, that garage conversions generally start at $149,000. A 550 square foot, 1 bedroom, 242, 750 square feet, 307, and 1,200 square foot, 2 to 3 bedroom, $400,000. So this is generally what we're seeing as far as what you can expect to pay to build an ADU in general. So let's talk a little bit about Maximo and our services. So what we do for all our homeowners to sign up for what's called a site evaluation is look at your property and see what are the options, what's possible on your lot. Every site is evaluated by our design team, and we use architectural and tools and software to determine things that would be red flags that would be important to know about the build, because you want to make sure that you can build as economically as possible. Things like power lines and where your utilities might connect to. Of course, looking at the setbacks and height. And of course, definitely the regulations for your jurisdiction. And then after we've done what's called the scoping meeting, we meet with you on Zoom or Google Meet. And that's where, usually actually previously I asked my homeowners to share any photos or videos and their goals for their ADU so that I can have a complete picture of what their project might look like. Then we will move on, if they're ready, to a design proposal and for design and permitting your ADU. And throughout this process, we're your project advocate, and we can connect you to lenders, general contractors, and generally experts in the field of ADUs. So like I mentioned, I'm going to add a hyperlink for any free resources. Wrong way. That I just mentioned, because I know we're kind of probably running out of time, but I'll put it in the chat. But I want to thank you so much for letting me speak about Maxwell Space and my own experience with ADUs, and answer any questions when I can. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. That was tremendously helpful, and there was a lot of information there. Again, we're recording this, and if anyone wants to circle back on the recording, you'll have the opportunity to do so, and Cecilia will have her information as well. I want to turn to Darren now, who works for the City of Oakland in the mayor's office. The ADUs are, as we've seen, a part of the housing solution across the state of California. So I have a couple questions for how that relates to Oakland. How do ADUs play a role in the City of Oakland's broader housing strategy? And then from there, what has the City of Oakland done to help facilitate accessory dwelling units? As I understand that they have done a fair amount. So we'd love to hear, Darren, your general thoughts on those questions. And then and remember, if you have questions, anyone in the audience, please go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and ask those.
Well, thanks, David. I'm really happy to be here tonight, everyone, and share the city's perspective on ADUs. So I'm Darren Ranaletti, and I work in the mayor's office as a housing policy advisor to Mayor Schaaf, and really the mayor's overall point person on everything ADU in the city. The mayor loves ADUs, I love ADUs, and the city loves ADUs. And so that's why I'm here to help spread the ADU gospel. ADUs really fit into the city's housing strategy for a number of reasons. Oakland, like much of the Bay Area, is really being crippled by this housing affordability crisis. And we believe that we need a multi-pronged approach to address that crisis. And that multi-pronged approach is often referred to as the 3P strategy. We need to protect existing residents from displacement. We need to preserve existing housing, and we need to produce more housing. And what's nice about ADUs is they do all that. They are small spaces that really do big things. They provide a lot of flexibility to owners. An owner, as their life changes, can move into the ADU. They can have a family member live in the ADU, a caregiver live in the ADU. I mean, it provides a lot more flexibility in an otherwise limited housing stock. It introduces housing variety in options into a single family neighborhood. So there's the diversity of income and people that come along with that. They tend to be rented at lower costs than other rental units. Our research shows that they tend to be rented below market, so they are a source of affordable housing. They particularly for owners that might be just hanging on. We have in Oakland a number of seniors, for example, on fixed incomes that an additional unit that would provide rental income can really make a difference. So we see them not only as a source of housing, but also as a source of community stabilization and wealth building. So for those reasons, we're focused on ADUs in a couple ways. One is around the city's role in approving and permitting ADUs. And then the city is also interested in ADUs as a funder in helping people build these things. Because even though they're cheaper to build than on a per unit basis than new multifamily housing, they're still pretty expensive. A lot of people don't have $200,000, $300,000 sitting around. Some people do, and people have been taking advantage of that, but a lot of folks don't. So in terms of permitting, the city's been doing a lot, and the data shows this. So in 2016, before we streamlined rules, we were doing about 30 ADUs a year. And 2019, we did almost 300. So that's a 10-fold increase. There was a little bit of a drop off in 2020, I think, due to COVID, but there's still huge demand, and I think we can do a lot more. But what we've done is we've really improved our resources for homeowners. So I encourage you to go to our website. It's a long URL, but you could just search Oakland ADUs in your browser, and there's a page there that has we have a new, easier to read, user-friendly application checklist. We have new guidelines for a step-by-step process. We also have new guidance for complying with Oakland's tenant protection laws. What does it mean to be an ADU landlord, for example? So that's good information. And we have relaxed some of our rules recently. For example, we used to have a much more onerous requirement for expensive property surveys to go along with your permit application, and we have reduced that. And now with COVID, we have an online permit submittal system, so you don't have to come down to the city. We actually were doing online permit submittals before the pandemic. And we were also, before the pandemic, doing evening permit center hours to give owners who, they've got day jobs and, may not be able to come down during the day, so they could come down in the evening. And I'm not aware of any other jurisdiction in the Bay Area that has done that. And so, when COVID hit, though, we closed the permit center down. So when we do reopen, we're interested in starting that back up again. And so you'd have the option of doing an online permit submittal or coming in and talking to somebody face to face. The thing that we're working on now is a pre-approved plan system that does two things. One is the city would be making pre-approved plans available for free to the public. So that would save you in costs in terms of hiring an architect or a designer to do the plans. You'd still have to apply for the permit, but the permit fee and time would be much reduced because the plans are already approved. So essentially what we're doing is just making sure that where you're placing it on the property complies with the regulations. And then we would also, as part of that system, enable architects and ADU companies to get their plans pre-approved so that then they could offer them to their clients at a discounted rate because the fees for the city would be much less. So that's something that we're hoping to launch in the next couple of months. And then finally in the summer, I'm really thrilled that we're gonna hopefully be launching a financial assistance program for homeowners to provide funding to predominantly lower income homeowners to help with the cost of building ADUs. So keep an eye out for that. And if you want to get updates on that program or anything related to ADUs at the city, go to our website, search City of Oakland ADUs, and on the website there is a button that you can click to sign up for updates. So we use that to send out information around ADUs. And that's it for me. Happy to stick around. Really great to see all of you here. And yeah, I'll be happy to answer some questions. So thanks.
Thanks, Darren. Really great information. I think the city of Oakland has done really great work in trying to make ADUs as accessible as possible. So thanks for your work there. A couple questions for you, Darren, or Cecilia, whoever wants to take it before we move on to our next panel. We've been keeping track of what's been coming in, so I'll try to get to as many as possible. Darren, you mentioned the resource for how ADUs layer into the city's tenant protections, or perhaps the state's tenant protections too. We know that the last few years, these protection policies have been evolving along with ADU policy itself. Can you talk a little bit about how Oakland's tenant protections actually extend to, or perhaps don't extend to ADUs themselves? I think homeowners may be confused with everything changing, state law, local policy, and whatnot.
Yeah, thanks, David. It is a little complicated. So it depends on the type of ADU, whether it's new construction or if it was converted from existing space. It depends on when it was built. And so what we've done is we've created a handout that actually has a matrix that based on those factors will tell you whether A, rent control applies, or B, just cause for eviction applies. So those are the two main ordinances that apply to protect tenants and to help govern the tenant-landlord relationship. And on that form, there's also links to additional information at our rent adjustment program, which administers those laws. So yeah, I would definitely encourage folks to take a look at that.
Awesome, thanks. Another question we had, this is for Darren or Cecilia, whoever wants to take it. Question about reassessments. Are you at risk of triggering a reassessment and by extension higher taxes if you are to pursue an ADU, or are there instances where that may be the case and other times may not be the case? Any clarity there?
Yeah, we actually get this question all the time with our homeowners, and so we have an answer. And no, it will not trigger a reassessment. What happens when you build an ADU is that just the ADU itself will be assessed, at whatever they determine is the cost, and then of course that'll be multiplied by the 1 to up to 2% Proposition 13 rate, and then that will be the additional cost to your bill. It's called a blended assessment. And that's a great question because, of course, many homeowners have been in their homes for a long time. You don't want anything to be able to trigger a reassessment. So, no, there won't be a reassessment, just the blended bill.
Oh.
And a little thing to add to that, some of you might be interested in legalizing an existing unpermitted ADU. We estimate in Oakland that there could be anywhere from 8,000 to 13,000 unpermitted ADUs. They're super common. There's definitely benefits to legalizing those and getting those permitted, but folks are worried about the impacts to their property taxes. So our understanding from our conversations with the county assessor is that if it was established prior to the most recent sale, your Prop 13 basis is based on that sale price, that purchase price. So the potential for it to actually increase is going to be less. If it was added without permits after the most recent sale, then yes, then legalizing it would be considered new space and you would be assessed at that. Depending upon when that was, you could be liable for back taxes. So if you have an existing unpermitted ADU that you're looking to legalize, definitely do your homework ahead of time so you understand what costs are involved.
Awesome. Thanks to you both. Really important information. Last question before we move on to the next panel. We're getting a lot of questions, and also really appreciate that we also have some experts in the chat who are helping out with the answering too. This is a nice community of ADU builders, advocates, and whatnot. So good job, everyone. Last question before moving on to panel number 2 is, in the city of Oakland, are there any restrictions on where ADUs can be built, or are they pretty much allowed anywhere?
They're pretty much allowed anywhere. There's two types. Well, there's There's a lot of types. We have a table on the web on our webpage that lists all these different types and the rules that apply. So I definitely encourage folks to check that out. Basically, if you're converting an existing building, they're allowed anywhere in the city. If you are doing new construction, they're allowed everywhere except in the city's high fire risk zone. So that there's certain areas in the hills. And that is, mapped on the city's website. So take a look at that table. And then if you're in the hills, then find the link to the map to see if you're in that zone. I think most of Rockridge is not in that zone, maybe parts of Upper Rockridge, but most of Rockridge is not in that zone, so they would be allowed.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I have 100 other questions, both personally and coming in, but I want to move on to the next panel. So either of you would like to stick around, you're more than welcome to. We'll try and get to everyone's questions at the conclusion of the second panel. But thank you, Darren and both Cecilia, for being with us this evening, sharing your insights and your knowledge, and really appreciate it. So moving on to the next panel. We have two individuals who will be sharing their insights as well. The first is Dan McDonnell, who is in a building. So and then after Dan, we'll be hearing from Greg, who is a Rockridge resident and an ADU owner. So we'll go ahead and start with Dan. Dan, thanks a lot for being with us, for sticking through the technical difficulties and just being generous with your time. So thank you very much. So first, if you could just give a little bit about background on what you do and maybe some experiences you had building ADUs here in our community.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, David. Thanks to the rest of the panel too. It was insightful to hear from Darren and from Cecilia. Yeah, my name is Dan McDonnell. I live and work out of Berkeley. I've been building my whole career. I started as a production home builder as a site superintendent, where we used to build 9-10 houses at a time in 90 days or less. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth, and then have spent the remaining, I don't know, 18 or 19 years of my career building, both for clients and for myself as a developer. 3 years ago, I had an alignment with a developer, and he had a bunch of properties to build, and he just got shut down by the bureaucratic process of building anything in Berkeley and Oakland. And so those projects never materialized. And as that was happening, the ADU market was starting to emerge. And I kind of put myself into it with both feet. And since 2017, we've built about 30 ADUs. My market area is from Piedmont and Rockridge on the southern boundary to like the El Cerrito Hills as sort of the northeastern boundary. And I personally consider that to be one market area when it comes to costs and construction costs. There's certainly some nuances to the topography and the site accessibility and permitting to some extent, but I've defined a very narrow geographic area so I can deliver high quality control to my clients and really know the ins and outs of the specific submarkets, down to knowing pretty much all the building inspectors in Berkeley, Piedmont, El Cerrito, and not all of Oakland, but the ones that work North Oakland by first name and know what they're going to be looking for. And that really is probably my number one point as it comes to building in your specific submarket, is to hire a design team that has that sort of level of intimate knowledge with the permitting department and with the building inspectors, because they're just, when it comes down to it, it's a very a human-oriented business. And so knowing your fellow humans and what they're looking for in the process of submitting a set of plans or delivering a completed product is the number one thing that I would recommend. That's why I don't go to Orinda or Danville or San Rafael, because I just would never be able to deliver the same level of service I could if I was to expand my territory that much. And so I think that kind of gets to the next point, and I alluded to it, is costs. And you're in Rockridge, the costs I would say would be analogous to what they would be in Piedmont or Albany or Berkeley. And my, my back of the napkin market touches on Cecilia's point, which is that those first few hundred square feet are extremely expensive. You know, you have one bathroom and one kitchen, one electrical panel, one waste line, one water line, soon to be no more gas lines. But all those things are the same hard cost on a dollar basis as for 200 square feet as they would be for 2,000 square feet. So they just don't scale down well. So I think kind of the floor to build anything, site build, prefab, whatever it is, I think there's a natural floor for new construction in someone's backyard at $150,000 to $180,000. That's probably what just the bottom, and then the marginal square foot goes down from there. But if you were to build a typical 550 square foot unit, the range of costs from a local builder, I think would be, you'd expect to spend between $500 and $800 per square foot to build that. And if you build larger, you could come down. I've priced projects recently as low as $400 a square foot for a 2-unit ADU complex, 2,200 square feet behind a 9-plex in Berkeley. That's the extreme low end, up to $1,000 a foot for a very, very small hillside and complicated building site. So it's just going to vary. If you are cost constrained, make sure you're designing with that in mind, and your architecture and your design team is on board with your expectations. And things that you can control there are roof line, window package, finishes to a large extent, or those are the big levers in building shape. A square is cheaper than an L or a T, for example, and make sure everyone's on the same page with what you're hoping to deliver, or maybe bring a builder on board early in the process to help, so you're not going down a rabbit hole with costs that you can never execute. I will say that the last 10 or so projects that I built have come in right around $600 a square foot for that 400 to 700 square foot building. And that kind of touches on a point that came up today. What is the resale value? This ADU phenomenon is quite new. And so particularly things that have been built within the last few years, what are they worth in an open market or exit scenario if you're selling your real estate? Well, it just happens that today I got wind from one of my clients that built in 2017, who's like a lot of people leaving the Bay Area for, in their minds, better climates or different environments, etc. He is selling his property out at 1,400 square feet, including the ADU, at $1,300 a square foot, and the buyer applied a valuation of $1,300 to his 280 square foot ADU. So that 280 feet cost him about 3 years ago. It cost him under 200 grand, and he's getting a value of 370, 380 for it in the eyes of the buyer pool. So what I'm saying sounds expensive. If you're all Rockridge residents, I'd say your real estate is hovering at around $1,000 a square foot if you were to sell it. And so I think you have a pretty compelling case that we're creating a tremendous amount of equity even at the cost that I'm sort of kind of quoting off the cuff. Another issue that's sort of come up recently is just the second meter requirement for the electrical panels. This is sort of a PG&E rule that hadn't been enforced until the last 6 or 8 months. So to some people that's an advantage, to others it's a disadvantage. But I think one thing people should plan for, particularly if your design and construction team is new, is that you are very likely going to need a new electrical meter. And in the execution of that new electrical meter, you're likely to trigger sort of a whole house panel upgrade in addition to the ADU. I guess I have another kind of final point as it relates to building. It takes us between 4 and 6 months to build an ADU in the backyard in the market area that we work. That's I think what you could expect. And lastly, prefab. I mean, this market is developing very quickly. I think someone one day will write a case study for a business school about the onset of ADU in the marketplace and what has taken place. It's become very quickly very crowded with a lot of venture capital funded startups. A lot of guys that have an Uber pedigree, literally, that are raising money to develop and build ADUs. As such, I think there's some unrealistic claims being delivered by people that don't have a lot of experience actually building anything. Now, I was in the 90s capitalized on Cosmo.com and often got Snickers bars delivered at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't pay any delivery fee for that. 99 cents for a 3 o'clock Snickers bar. So I would never begrudge anybody from capitalizing on what I would consider a transfer of wealth from venture capital to homeowners through the ADU market. So if you are able to find a builder that you're happy with and you can believe the story and buy into their pricing model and believe they'll execute, I think you should absolutely capitalize on that. But kind of beware, the Contractor State License Board limits your deposit to $1,000. That would be your max that you should be willing to risk losing to a startup vendor. So that's not to take a parting shot at anybody. I wish them all the best. I do want to kind of give that alert because I'm encountering it a lot, and particularly lately, and just something to note. So I guess I'll hang around for questions. I don't know if I missed any major bullet points, David, but if I did, maybe you could.
I think you covered everything wonderfully. Thank you, Dan. I have one question before moving on to Greg. It's one that came up earlier, and one I think probably is on the minds of a lot of folks is the issue of parking, right? Is parking required when you build an ADU? Are there circumstances where it is not required? And just are you building a lot of ADUs that either have or don't have parking? What are you seeing up there?
Yeah, my typical, this actually brings up something I wanted to hit on. My typical job actually is kind of quote unquote garage conversion. And so that was always like the official parking place on most properties in Oakland, Berkeley, et cetera. And because we were not allowed to park in the setback. I think the state law is what required or what got rid of any parking requirement whatsoever. And so we have converted a lot of garages. I will say, and this was a very critical point that I almost missed, was the value of your existing garage, unless it was designed for human habitation when it was constructed, is probably minus $10,000 to $20,000 because it's currently has an antiquated slab. There's no seismic value, very limited waterproofing. Likely, it's a science experiment. Most of the garages I'm in are growing mushrooms and/or moss on the inside. They're not of any value, and so it's best to plan and prepare for that conversation as you kind of move down that path. I think of the 30 we've built and the hundreds I've seen. Only one has been able to really salvage any value from the existing structure. So that's a conversation that I think something you all should hear, because it's very valuable in this moment.
Thanks, Dan. Wonderful insights. Really appreciate that. And last, certainly not least, I want to turn to Greg Pasquale, who is a neighbor here in Rockridge and has also built an ADU himself in at his home. So we asked Greg to be here really to give us the homeowner perspective as someone who has pursued an ADU right here in our own backyard. Greg, would love to hear your story about why you decided to pursue an ADU, what it was like making a decision on contractor design, and what the process ended up playing out like. So Greg, we'd love to hear your insight there.
Cool. Well, thank you, David, and thanks, Michelle and Leonora, for organizing this, and everyone for being here and sticking through the Zoom challenges. Yeah, my wife and I, we built an ADU, and it's just been awesome for our family. And so I want to tell you about it. We've lived in Rockridge for nearly 10 years in a house that was built in 1913. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,400 square feet on a 3,000 square foot lot. That's about as small a lot as you'll find in Rockridge. Most in our part of kind of the Rockridge flats are 4,000. And a few years ago, when my wife was pregnant with our second kid in 2015, we were sort of out of space. And we asked ourselves this really hard question: do we move? Like, should we move to a bigger house in Oakland or leave Oakland? We really didn't want to. We love that we can walk to College Avenue. Should we add to our house? Well, that was going to be a lot more expensive. And also it was going to be really disruptive. Okay, now I've got a pregnant wife. Are we really going to do construction inside the house? And we love our house. We didn't want to change it. So we decided to build an ADU in our backyard. Why? Again, we love this neighborhood, didn't want to move. We love living in a small house, actually. We live like a ship, and we have nooks and crannies with storage everywhere. Everything has a place, no clutter. We probably drive our kids nuts. They're gonna like live in McMansions in the suburbs when they get older, I bet, just to rebel against us. But the biggest thing for us was flexibility. And Darren touched on this, that we saw an ADU as a space that could be perfect for visiting grandparents and siblings, great for an au pair, if we ever wanted to do that, a home office or fitness room, which has like been absolute money in COVID. This has been our workspace while we've got preschool running in our house full time with some neighbors, and also a place for a grown kid to come back after college. And maybe if we age in place later in life, for a caretaker to live. So it just gives so much flexibility to our lives to stay in Rockridge for a long time, and to stay where we want to be and live the lifestyle we want to live. So how do we do it? We had this awful, and I'm going to show you a picture. We had this awful garage in our backyard, and it was falling down. It had rats. It always had leaks. You can see the pooled water on the roof. Like, it could have not rained for months, and there was pooled water on the roof and on the floor. I kept my snorkel gear in this plastic bin, and rats ate through the plastic bin and ate my mask and snorkel. Like, it was just awful. And we thought, oh, maybe we could convert the garage to an ADU. And that was our starting point. And after we studied it, we decided, you know what, we're going to knock it down. We're going to build on the footprint. It was on the property line, on the rear and side property line. So that kind of vested our rights to build there, which was a question that came up in the chat. We came up with a design just by sketching on paper. We really just want to stick with this footprint, maybe expand a little closer to the house, but on a 3,000 square foot lot, we didn't want to sacrifice our backyard. That was important to us. So on the right side of the screen, you can see our existing house, our little porch, our nice garden, and the 330 square feet where that garage sat and where our ADU now sits. We hired an architect. The architect was about $4,000. Our structural engineer was $3,000. I'll tell you about them in a minute. We designed this, so same footprint as the garage. Oh, the other thing about the garage, in addition to hosting rats and puddles of water, you couldn't actually get a car to it. So it was totally worthless. So we have, little living space in the front with a small kitchenette, bath, and a small storage area. Our total budget, so design and engineering, was $7,000. Permits and fees, about $5,000. We paid our general contractor $124,000. That was actually $118,000 was the original bid. There were $4,000 in change orders, specifically kind of all related either to upgrades we made, or we had some dirt that was really spongy and you couldn't build on, so they had to take that out and bring in some new dirt. And then $2,000 of that was a new house main electrical panel. But then my wife and I, our commitment was, let's build this thing as cheap as possible, but then go big on finishes. And that's something that was important to us. We wanted Heath tile, really nice tile. We wanted top of the line appliances and plumbing fixtures, really nice lighting fixtures. So we went big dollars on the stuff that you see and touch and feel, but really simple and really cheap on the build. I don't care what's inside my walls. I care about the stuff that I touch and see and feel. So that's kind of where we spent our money. So our total cost, $154,000. The schedule, it was about 2 months to design it, 3 months in permitting, 5 months of construction that ran a little long, maybe closer to 6 because of flooring. I'll talk about that when I mention our lessons learned. I guess I covered that in the 1 month cleanup closeout. So start to finish, we were under a year, which was really cool. This budget, I think Dan started to put it in perspective in terms of the return that your square feet you can build in this neighborhood sell for over $1,000 a foot. We used a home equity line of credit at 3% interest for that $150,000. So that's about $4,500 a year in interest that this actually cost us. If we rented it, we haven't, but we'd get $2,500 to $3,000 a month probably. Studios in downtown Oakland rent for close to $2,500 to $3,000 a month. So we think it's pretty comparable because of the value of this neighborhood. But that's $30,000 to $36,000 a year. That's really a 5-year payback on your investment, or like a 20% return on cost. So most residential real estate developers invest at a 5 to 6% return on cost. I don't know what your 401k does, but if anybody can show me anything else that returns 20% annual yield on cost, like, I will give you my money, because those returns are incredible. That's if you rent it. But of course, as Dan mentioned, if you sell it at $1,000 a foot, ours is 335 square feet. It's small, but $335,000 on $155,000 original investment, we would have made our money back and $100,000 if we were to sell it today. And we've had brokers come through occasionally as we think about selling our house, and they've said, oh my gosh, this is incredible, and people want this. And so, I think it really does play out. But like, we didn't do this year of work and spend this $150,000 for 20% cash flow or for the sale value. We did it for our family. We did it for us. We have had lots of friends and family visit and stay with us. It's been so nice to have a place for our grandparents to come and stay and like be able to say goodnight, and they go out back and we get a break. We renovated our house a couple years ago, and construction went long, and we moved into our casita. And I would tell you that living with my wife and a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and 335 square feet is not something I'd recommend. But given our alternatives, it was great to have this option. A few years ago, we moved my wife's 95-year-old grandmother to Merrill Gardens, 2 blocks from our house, senior home. And as she was in her last weeks, we had family come from LA, from Amsterdam, from the East Coast, and this was a place where they could stay and say goodbye to grandma. And it was so nice to provide that for our family. But we've also hosted tons of neighbors. So the family across the street, they had a baby. Grandma and grandpa stayed in our casita. Our neighbors next door, they were from Missouri. And whenever family would come out, they would stay in our casita, because so many of the houses in this neighborhood are just too small to have a guest room. And so we have been the guest room for our neighbors next door, across the street. One of my high school friends, his dad comes a lot to visit his new grandkid. He stays with us about once a month. And it's just so nice to like be the guest room for our neighbors. And then of course, in COVID, it's been amazing, right? We're running preschool in the ground floor of my house with 3 little kids. And my wife and I can come out here and work. And actually, I had a fever a few weeks ago. And of course, everybody panics when you get a fever right now, and rightfully so. And so I quarantined out here till I got my negative COVID test result. And I had a place to like come and quarantine in my own house, and my wife could just leave meals on the doorstep. So that's the outside. This is the inside. It's the space I'm in now. Lessons learned. I think that this ADU has been good for Oakland, Rockridge, neighbors, and us. I talked about us, but the Bay Area has this huge housing crisis. There was a 5-year period, 2012 to when we finished this construction. The Bay Area added 550,000 jobs and 50,000 housing units. That's more than 10-to-1 jobs to housing units. People need a place to live, and more housing is what's going to help Oakland stay diverse and affordable. And that's important to us in raising a family here. I would also say it's good for Rockridge, because when people stay with us, like they go out to dinner, they go shopping, they buy gifts. People are like, wow, I love Market Hall, and they spend money, and they love our local bookstores, and they spend money. And if we want College Avenue to continue to thrive, we need more housing in Rockridge, and we need more housing of all types, different sizes, different kinds. And building it in your backyard is one way to support College Avenue staying vibrant, because we all shop on Amazon, right? And these stores and services need more people shopping at them, and more housing in Rockridge helps make that happen. I also learned that, it is not as easy in a lot of other cities as it is in Oakland, but the state of California over the last few years has passed a lot of laws to help make building ADUs better. And some of the stuff Darren talked about, we are so fortunate to have great leadership from Mayor Schaaf, from Darren, from folks in the city planning and building department who've created these great resources to make this easier for homeowners like us. And I'm really thankful, because it was a pretty smooth process, because this is a city that as open arms to housing because they recognize it's good for the tax base, it's good for diversity, it's good for our values of the city. You know, land, the cool thing about building an ADU is like your land is free, you already own it. But think about what else can be. I have a neighbor about 5 houses up building an ADU right now. They've been building it for like 6 months. They're at the tail end. They're doing their sewer connection right now, and it is a disaster and a mess. We originally thought we were going to have to do a new sewer connection for our ADU. It was going to cost like 12 to 15 grand. And then we realized that if we could just lift it up 8 inches, so there's a step when you step up into it, we could save that and we could just tie into the plumbing under our house. So that was like, you know, partway through construction, we were like, wait, lift it up, tie into the sewer, don't do a new connection. And we saved over 10 grand. And there are other things you can figure out. And I guess that's the next bullet point, keep utilities simple. 5 years ago, it was easy to connect gas. I wish we hadn't. We connected gas for a gas heater and gas water heater, but I think there's a lot of evolution now that like we know now that gas is not the best way to do a lot of these things for the climate. And frankly, it wasn't good for our pocketbook either. We had to upsize our gas meter. We had to run a gas line through our backyard that I really wish wasn't there. And I wish we'd gone all electric at the time. But keeping utilities simple is a great way to save money. Saving an old building may not save money. I think Dan was talking about this with a lot of people trying to build in garages. We tried to like convert our existing garage at first. We started with that with the architect and talking to builders and realized really quickly, bad idea. It was a garbage building and it wasn't worth saving. Check in with neighbors early, kind of good story, bad story. Our neighbor next door was so gracious. She planned to do some construction later. She said, use my driveway for access. It made our construction so much easier to have our neighbor giving us that help. On the flip side, neighbors behind us were really upset. They'd painted a mural on the back of our old garage like 30 years ago and built a mound of dirt against it with a built-in fountain and lots of ivy, which explains a lot of our water issues and rats, we learned, but they were very sad to lose that. And there was a little bit of fighting over that, and that was hard. I wish we'd talked to them earlier. Dirt, anytime you dig in dirt, there are surprises. We had this really spongy dirt. That was a surprise. It cost us a couple grand to like haul out some bad dirt, bring in some new dirt. And then flooring delays. I was just talking to one of the families that brings their 4-year-old over to our house for this little preschool. We've been running in these COVID times and they're finishing up an ADU and they've been waiting for over a month to put their flooring in. And we had the same experience. We were done except for our floors and we had to wait about 6 weeks until the humidity was right to install our floors. And that's a common problem. So, and again, Dan, I didn't know, but after hearing from him, seems great. I should have put him on this list, but Rebecca Amato is an amazing architect. Used to have her office on College Avenue, advertises in the Rockridge News, does great work. 2 really good structural engineers in Berkeley who've done a lot of little buildings like this, and E&J Builders who built our ADU. You know, Rebecca Amato is super involved in Chabot School. Eric and Jane, who make up E&J, they've got 3 little kids. They live close by. It's just super cool to work with local people and support the Oakland economy. And that's all I've got to say.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. That was really incredible. Just so much information, and it sounds like it's been a really fantastic development for your family, both literally and figuratively. And wow, those numbers you cited are really incredible. Who needs Bitcoin? You should build an ADU instead. So this has been fantastic. I know we had only scheduled to go to 8:30, but because we started late, we're going to take question and answer now. So for everyone who's still sticking around, if you haven't already posted your questions into the chat, please continue to do so. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Michelle, who's going to be moderating the Q&A. I think she has some questions teed up for our panel in general. But again, thank you all for being here, and really appreciate you being so generous with your time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all. I think I've added Cecilia, Darren, and Greg up on the screen, Dan as well. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions from the chat. that came through over the course of the conversation, but please, those of you who still have questions, add them into the chat. We'll try and cover them. We do ask that this part remains moderated, just because it can be really hard if you unmute yourself in these Zoom days. If we don't get to your questions, we'll do our very best to be able to follow up with the general Rockridge News list host in case we have more than we can handle it. I want to start with, and I think this could be a good question for the builders on the call, Dan and Cecilia. We have gotten a lot of questions about how costs vary across different types of ADUs. So I was wondering if you could speak to approximations of costs across a detached ADU, an attached ADU, which means when it shares a wall with the original unit, with the original housing unit, and a more traditional granny flat or a basement unit.
It's a good question. Well, I could start by taking that. I only build detached new construction after having spent a large part of my career remodeling. And my analysis is they are about the same cost all in if you deal with an antiquated basement that has probably waterproofing issues, fire separation issues, seismic and energy code requirements, and then all the challenges of segregating the heating and ventilation system, which is a requirement. But then you've got old dust to contend with, which is why I've decided to stay in the backyard. But I would expect that they would cost the same if you were to kind of price it out. I don't know, maybe Cecilia, if you have kind of something to add to that.
Yeah, no, nothing to add. I mean, it's generally about the same as what we're seeing, no matter, what you do. Yeah.
And with that comes like a lack of flexibility, the use in the backyard and the flexibility of the use options that exist there. And additionally, you're adding marginal square footage to the property as opposed to capturing existing square footage typically. And so I don't think the economics are as compelling either.
Thank you. If you have follow-up questions on that, please pop them in the chat. So another thing that's come up a lot is financing. So this is something I'm happy to speak with along with David. I also work at the Turner Center for Housing Innovation. We do a little bit of work on this, but I would say I'll give a first point on that is that the best way to find out financing is to talk with your local bank or to a loan officer directly to see what the financing options are for you, given the equity that you have in your house, if you have it, any outstanding mortgages you have, and the estimated property value. With that, there are quite a few different financing options you can use. I know, Cecilia, you guys offer some of these resources through Maxable. Could you speak a little bit to some of the financing options that you've seen and guided clients towards?
Well, so first of all, we have if you go to YouTube and under Maxable Space, we actually have a new video on financing options for ADUs, and it explains more in detail what these products look like. So just if you go to our website, there's YouTube under Maxable Space is a great video, but we're definitely seeing two things that we're seeing primarily for our homeowners are home equity lines of credit and then construction loans. And in some cases, some of the lenders actually aren't doing HELOCs, so we're definitely seeing construction loans being the primary type of product right now. And it's all, as some of us have been saying, it's all mixed up, and especially what happened with COVID and the underwriting now. And so generally, of course, we have a lot of homeowners who've been in their homes for a long time, have great equity, and maybe even already have a line that they've pulled out for just in case. So they don't have to worry about actually going to a lender now. But they, like, I know from my husband and I, we had our last time we refinanced, the guy said, well, why don't you just do this if you need it for an emergency? So it's just sitting there. So that's what we're seeing, construction loans and home equity lines of credit right now.
One other I'd mention, and my family, we used a home equity line for this project and a prior project, but another line of credit that was available to us that we've used for some projects was a securities line. So we went to the bank that we invest, our retirement account with, and we were able to leverage against that at a 2.25% interest rate, which was super interesting. So if you have retirement funds or other investment portfolio, you could speak to your investment advisor about whether that's available to you.
Thank you. And a question for Darren. There are a lot of questions about impact fees and fees in Oakland. I saw you address some of them in the chat, but would you mind elaborating on the standard fees for an ADU, specific Oakland policies, and what a typical Rockridge resident may be able to expect from a city fees perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So when we talk about fees, it's important to keep in mind what type of fees we're talking about. There's usually two types of fees that are charged during the permitting process. One is the fee for service. So that covers the the cost of the city to provide the service. So that's usually your building permit fee and your inspection fee and things like that. And that's just set based upon the cost of labor for the city to provide that service. The other kinds of fees, which is I think what most folks are talking about, is what could be loosely described as impact fees. And that's a fee that is charged to offset the impact of the construction. So Oakland, for residential construction, has a whole suite of development impact fees to help fund affordable housing, improvements to the transportation system, new public facilities, because the creation of new housing puts demand for those types of things. However, when the city adopted its ADU rules, actually before the state, we exempted those development impact fees for ADUs. The state has subsequently, as Cecilia mentioned, exempted ADUs under 750 square feet. The school districts in the state are authorized through the state to charge a school impact fee. So, the Oakland Unified School District is a separate entity from the city. Under state law, they're allowed to charge a school impact fee over 500 square feet. So they will do that. And as Greg said in the chat, I think it's about $3.50 a square foot. So you pay that to the city, and the city provides that money to the district. And then different utility districts then also have fees for upgrading their service. So if you're, PG and East Bay Mud, depending on what level of upgrade you need to the service, might also be charging impact fees.
Thank you, Darren. So takeaway, a lot of different fees, but overall, could you give a picture of what maybe Cecilia or Dan or Greg, maybe Greg, from your experience, what your fees look like in your situation?
So the fee for service Darren talked about we had a planning review fee that was quite small. It was design review exempt. And then the building permit fee, that totaled about $5,000. And then we didn't have any impact fees because it wasn't subject to City of Oakland. It was below the 500 square feet for Oakland Unified. We ended up not doing a new sewer connection with East Bay Mud, but tying into our existing sewer. We did have to install a new electrical panel just to upsize the panel for our house. And so we just had a sub panel out here, but upgrading the panel on the house was it was right about $2,000. And we did have to upsize our gas meter, which in retrospect, again, I would have gone more electric and just avoided gas. And that is now the City of Oakland policy, or will be soon. I don't know if it's phasing in or if it's in effect, but in retrospect, don't waste your time running a gas line would be my advice on that one.
Thank you, Greg. Dan, you just responded to an interesting question in the chat that I want to make sure everybody sees. So there's a lot of uncertainty now in our housing markets and urban trends as people respond to the pandemic and how it's changed how we interact with cities and with each other. Could you speak to a little about how you are seeing that impact the ADU market and any clients that are planning to rent their units out as long-term housing?
Yeah, we can read about the broader rental market suffering in light of the pandemic, but I was talking to a property management friend of mine today, and this actually I have a single family home that I'm completing. It's under construction. I'm contemplating renting it, and I was asking about the market for rent, and she said the single family home market is extremely strong as people leave the cities and they leave dense multi-family buildings. They want more space. I think that's true of the ADU market also. We just finished one by Monterey Market, and my client is just getting it on the market, and she's had, overwhelming interest in her limited advertisement, which just really began this week. I had another one on Acton. I'm in touch with that client because we're doing something at his primary residence, and his initial rent was $24.50 on it was 300 square foot little teeny tiny studio, and he re-rented. He lost $100. He's down to $23.50, but he's renting, like $6 or $7 a square foot. And I think Ryan over at Inspired ADUs just put in the chat. By the way, Inspired ADUs is fantastic. We've done 5 or 6 projects with them, and they do a really excellent job of incorporating senior and aging in place elements into great design. So really can't say enough good things about them. But he said he's got their most recent rental in Oakland is $3,900 a month for 737 square foot, which supports kind of what the anecdotal data I've just reported on for renting ADUs.
Thank you, Dan. And I'm just seeing another question in the chat back on the fees question. And if Darren, could you clarify if the fees are different if you build a unit if you are refinishing an existing unit or a basement versus doing new construction?
Well, the permit fees are going to be based on the value of the project. So, more expensive projects, more expensive permit fee. And then those, for the most part, city impact fees don't apply. If you're over that 500 square foot for a school impact fee, then it doesn't matter if it's new construction or within an existing building. And then for the utility connections, it's just based upon what utility connections are part of the project.
Great, thank you for clarifying. I think I hit a lot of the questions that came through the chat or tried to sum them up. And yes, thank you, Leonora, sharing on behalf of Rockridge Community Planning Council. The recording will be up on our YouTube channel. We will also be sharing this out on the Rockridge Community Planning Council communication channels. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to email the info at Leonora, can you actually put our email in the chat? That's probably the best thing for us to share. And you can please email questions to us, and we will do our best to get them to the panelists in order to see if there are other findings, or at least direct you to the right resources. And if there aren't any other questions, can I just say thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. This was quite the pandemic experience, having a Zoom count completely not work at the beginning. And I think that if you stuck with this, clearly you care about putting an ADU in your backyard, and we are grateful. It's such a wonderful way to add light density into our neighborhoods, add additional housing, expand space. And we hope that you have learned something in this seminar. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for also sticking with us and using their evening to stare at their computer yet again, since we know that we all spend, a lot of us do spend a lot of time on our computers these days. And with that, thanks, David, for helping put this together. Thanks. Oh, Leonora, I see you have a question you want to chime in. Leonora, our board chair of the RCPC.
Actually, it's not a question, it's an apology. The wonders of modern technology. I've been going over our Zoom account with a fine-tooth comb, and I still cannot figure out what the problem is, because all of the settings are exactly what worked for our last board meeting. So my apologies to Zoom, and thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. This was this was improvisational theater, and thank you so much for sharing your Berkeley channel, Michelle.
Yeah, of course. Don't let Berkeley know. Okay, everybody, have a great night, and I'd like to connect
Darren,
with you
get ready
all.
for a slew of ADU applications coming your way.
I hope so. Bring it on.
We can help.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.